So portfolio is a really critical way of us looking at your skills. For the admissions process at Sheffield, we want to see the kind of range of work that you've been doing through school, sometimes in school, sometimes out of school. It's about your drawings that you've done, your paintings, it's about photography. It's a chance for you to show us how you can lay out information in a clear, concise, but exciting way.
So in a portfolio, we're interested in seeing evidence of creativity, and we're interested in seeing some sort of critical reflection. We know that there are lots of different skill sets that everybody has, and so we recognise that there's going to be a really broad range of ideas and things that are produced in the portfolio, and that's something that we really welcome. We would like to see perhaps your best, things that you think that are your best skills, things that have been produced with care. They don't necessarily have to be architectural in any way. They might be drawings, they might be models, they might be sculptures, they might be paintings, and all of those things are interesting to us. I think what we want to see evidence of is your creativity and how you interpret spaces and places around you.
So I think when I was choosing what to put in my portfolio, I was quite conscious of the fact that I'd chosen to study product design for my A-level instead of art. So I didn't have as wide a range of pieces as I might have liked to choose from to put together kind of an artistic portfolio. So I think I went for showing a very wide range of things and just things that I'd kind of tried at various different points in time. So I think I probably went for showing the kind of like breadth of skills as opposed to necessarily depth of skills.
Because I had quite a fine art based and DT kind of range of experience, I tended to try and include a mixture from all those different subjects and also try and balance as well own kind of personal work that I'd done not in kind of school as well. So I'd done at home, or I'd done like over the weekend, or done in my spare time.
And so I tried to focus on using a range of media, looking at trying to show different techniques, pencil work, painting, but then also playing to the 3D aspect. I included my prom dress because I made that, so looking at the 3D aspect of textiles, and then also I did some like woodwork in product design, and I made a bedside table.
I also tried to show a range of working in terms of 2D stuff and sketching and painting and stuff like that, but also 3D, so showing how I maybe sculpted something in clay, or showing how I'd made something in DT, and showing how I'd even like photographed that as well. So how I'd taken something and an element of it was also showing it and representing it in a certain way. So how do I make it to look quite clean and quite clear on a page? How do I light it? Stuff like that. So all these were kind of different elements that I worked with to try and show my work in the best light.
In your portfolio, we'd like you to include 10 sheets of your work, and one of those sheets should be a sheet that's specific to the Sheffield portfolio, which is called My Street. And in the My Street page, we'd like you to give us a representation of your street. And that might be some sort of reflection on your street. It might not be just an exact representation, but it might be to do with memories of the street. It might be to do with experiences that you've had on the street. It might be aspects of the street that you like or you dislike. It might be to do with the way that the street sits within the city. It might be to do with materials or textures in the street. And it's a very personal kind of page that tells us a lot about you and the way that you look at spaces, or the way that you reflect on or think about different places. We'd also like you to include on that sheet no more than 200 words explaining what your kind of thought process or the ideas that you're trying to represent are.
What I thought was really interesting about my street, so in terms of kind of like approaching the task, it wasn't the street itself. Like it's not particularly exciting. It's just a bunch of houses really. So I was trying to think what made my street unique as opposed to elsewhere. And that was very much kind of the characters and the people who live there. So we're not necessarily kind of like a close-knit neighbourly community, but you do know who people are because you will have heard something about like the policeman down the end of the road, or the guy who climbs out onto the garage roof in the middle of the night and sits there with a traffic cone, that kind of thing. So these are the people that I chose to kind of like focus on.
So I probably took quite an orthodox approach to representing my street. I think purely in terms of the background that I had and the way that I'd learnt to do, the way that I'd learnt to paint and do certain things, where I chose to kind of use a media that I was comfortable with, which was using oil paint with a palette knife. The aim was not to kind of capture my street in the most accurate way possible. It was more so to capture an idea or something that I liked. And I think for me, the image that I ended up doing was capturing, I guess, more something that was related to the colours on the street.
My street is a very boring sort of 1950s brick and concrete street. And I knew that drawing it just almost how I saw it would be quite repetitive and quite uninspiring. But the interesting aspect of my street is its history. And so I started thinking about how I could visually represent that. The further you go down, the further into history you delve. Media-wise, I knew my skill set from GCSE was strongest in pencil, and it's quite interesting having to reteach myself how to draw. I was quite nervous that I'd potentially lost the skill because I didn't do A-level art at all. But I did a few sketches of it and then eventually tried to go in and render this one.
In all these different kind of portfolios that we've looked at, I think they've all taken a different stance with it, whether it's something where it's trying to narrate the history of their street, the kind of characters on their street, how their street kind of sits in their head as something which is kind of quite emotionally driven, and I think something which has an element of nostalgia to it.
What we're looking for with the My Street project is kind of something that is interpretive of your street rather than a straight representation, because I really like that you've looked at the history of your street, and it's something that's quite personal, and it demonstrates. I mean, I think it's a very, very broad, and it's sort of designed to be something that's very broad, so that it's accessible to everybody, and everybody's street kind of has different meaning to them, or you've got different things that you're interested in that street, whether it's to do with history, whether it's to do with experience. And so I think it's really nice the way that you've represented that. We're not always just looking at drawing ability or skills that you develop in A-level art. So I think we're really keen that people aren't put off making a portfolio because they haven't done A-level art, and we know that it's quite an intimidating thing sometimes, but hopefully that it doesn't put people off. I think that's something that we look for with portfolios as well, sort of people who are curious and how you can represent that curiosity, and even if perhaps your skills aren't amazing yet, there's always time for that. We're more interested in people who are wanting to learn or have an opinion on something and want to be able to represent that in a particular way, even if it's not really polished. It doesn't need to be really kind of finished.
I think my general advice, especially for someone who doesn't necessarily have an art or design background, like I didn't at A-level, it would be show what you're interested in, show your creativity. You can always improve on your skill set and how well you can draw. But one of the things which is a lot harder to teach is how you creatively think, and potentially maybe just use a rougher sense of model making or photography, something which can be a lot more messy, but you can then photograph in a very interesting way, and you can create some very interesting pieces.
Kind of rule of thumb is to let your images kind of breathe on a page, to maybe include a little bit of text just in case it could be unclear in terms of how you've done something or the story you're trying to tell or the idea behind a certain piece of work.
It was more about what I'm interested in and more my thought process and how I creatively think, rather than being absolutely amazing at a certain skill set. I think showing variety and interest is like what I found quite important in this.